Okay, so good day, morning, evening, afternoon, everybody. Happy to see you with us for the memorial of Frans van Waarden. For me, he was first a mentor, then a mentor, and then a friend. So I'm excited and I'm very very happy to be part of this event and actually part of the life of all of you in a sense. We are a professional community, but also and maybe most importantly, we are also a human social community. And with Frans' generosity, I could run faster, develop deeper, and be a better scholar and a better person. I will say a few things later on, but I'd like to start this event first by presenting a note, a recorder note from Colin Scott, Professor Colin Scott, who is the chair of the ECR groups, standing group on regulation and governance. I hope you all see.
Hello, colleagues and friends. I'm Colin Scott from University College Dublin. I was until recently the co-convener of the ECPR Standing Group on Regulatory Governance. And I wanted to say a few words about our dear friend Frans van Waarden. I was shocked and saddened to learn of his death recently. I first met him, I think, at an ECPR event in 2005. Of course, I already knew his remarkable scholarship in the field of governance. He has been so influential for so many of us. But what a pleasure it was to meet the man, always smiling, always curious, always engaged. A great friend to me, certainly professionally, a great friend to the field of regulatory governance, and someone we will miss very much indeed. Sorry I can't be with you today to celebrate Frans's scholarship and life, but I'm with you in spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And I'd like to move on with a few photos of from Frans' life. Now, the photos and the music that accompanied the photos will take about 4 or 5 minutes. And my apologies if I didn't include the photos in the right manner or enough photos of all of you. And this is also the opportunity to say thank you to my assistant, Ophir Guy, who did it for us. So let's start. I'd like to invite Brigitta Unger, Professor Brigitta Unger, a partner, also collaborate with Frans, mainly a partner, to start saying a few words about Frans. I would also say, I invite you to write to me privately or in public and say if you want to speak. So Brigitta, you are the first, please. And Marcus after.
I met
please.
Frans in 1991, so 30 years ago. He was then the so-called network from Waarden at the Center for European Studies. We met through our dear teacher and friend, Professor Philip Schmitter, who was then the director and head of the department Center of European Studies at Stanford University. Frans had transposed the natural science idea of networks into social sciences. At this time, nobody in economics knew about network analysis. Nowadays, it's booming. And Frans did something which he liked best. He liked to create order. He liked to create typologies, categories of types of policy networks, as he did with this first study. So when I met him, he was the network from Waarden. And in Stanford, we started, and I want to tell you about two co-authorships we did, our first one and our last one. The first one started in Stanford, and it was a book which was also shown right now in the pictures, Convergence or Diversity, Economic and Political Policy Making in an International World. We started this together in Stanford, and I learned from Frans that he is never on time, always late, but that he has a very good way of, so to speak, predicting correctly and ordering. And what we predicted in this book was basically that, contrary to what at this time lawyers thought, convergence is not a necessary outcome of just signing EU treaties. The lawyers then thought if we sign EU treaties of harmonization, there will be harmonization. In our book, we for the first time said there might also be divergence appearing. And I think the Brexit of the United Kingdom has shown clearly that our hypothesis that divergence can also appear was not so wrong. The book appeared in 1995 with Avebury. Our last joint publication was in 2013. It was an article in the research handbook on money laundering, where Frans chose, he always liked good, nice titles, How to Dodge Drowning in Data, the rule and risk-based anti-money laundering policies compared, 3Ds, dodge, drowning in data. I have to confess, I had to look up what dodge means, but it sounds nice. In this last article, he predicted that the rule-based approach, when replaced by the risk-based approach, that this might not survive. A rule-based approach in money laundering meant that banks have to report from a certain, according to a certain rule, for example, every transaction which exceeds 10,000 euros or dollars, and otherwise they get punished. And that led to an overflooding, to a drowning in data of the government, since everything was reported and the information was basically not valid anything. So they replaced it by the risk-based approach, which leaves freedom to the banks to self-define when they would report or not. Frans's prediction was that if this risk-based approach is done, banks will eventually be fined for not reporting correctly, then go to the court, and then the courts will again set new rules. So there will be a new rule-based approach because the courts will finally decide new rules. When we see now that just a couple of weeks ago, the Vatican has sued the anti-money laundering policy authorities for not doing correctly their job, that's a first sign that Frans's hypothesis that the risk-based approach might fall back and become a rule-based approach might indeed turn out right. For me, Frans was a wonderful co-author, an intellectual sparring partner, and a wonderful partner in private life. One usually says that women like the alpha animals, strong men or men with a lot of money or a lot of power. I must say that the most important criterion for me for a man was to never get bored with him. Franz's curiosity, creativity, and peculiarities made him this ideal partner for the last 30 years.
Thank you, Brigitte. I'd like to bring in Professor Marcus Afferland. I think you are his first PhD student.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So I think we are going back to Constance's life, and we'll continue after you with Charles Ram. So, Marcus, please.
Yeah, also thank you, David, for organizing this. So after the Stanford period, Frans went to Constance, working with Gerd Lehmbruch, and I attended a course with Frans on public policy, focusing on policy networks, as Brigitte also has mentioned, and policy styles. And I just came back from an exchange program from Rotterdam. So we had something to talk about, the Netherlands, Germany, and well, we met from time to time. I was also an assistant to another professor, so I would be on the floors in Constance. At a certain point in time, he got the offer in Utrecht, and then he wanted to take me with him. So he created a job there, and after a very nice evening in the then house in Leiden to discuss these things, I decided to indeed join him in the Netherlands, and to became indeed his first PhD student. So on a personal note, going to Utrecht, of course, had quite an important impact on me, employing a non-trivial counterfactual. Without the invitation of Frans, I would probably have never come to the Netherlands, and I would not have met my wife and creating a family and actually stay. So I'm really deeply indebted for his invitation. Back to Frans. Frans worked with Gerd Lehmbruch, who was one of the two main founders of the study of corporatism, the other one being Philipp Schmitter, with whom he has worked already in Stanford. And Gerd Lehmbruch belonged to an early generation of political scientists who actually had not studied political science themselves. So Lehmbruch actually studied theology, Protestant theology. And in line with this approach, Lehmbruch had an interpretative hermeneutic method. So Lehmbruch would typically start intellectual conversation with, in German it would be, ist es nicht eigentümlich? Is it not strange? Is it not peculiar that this and this is the case? So this was a kind of a puzzle-driven research, a detective-like approach that appealed very, very much to Frans. Frans was a very big fan of Lehmbruch. And Lehmbruch worked then in his applications in a tradition where he compared institutions, an approach which sometimes is, I would say, mischaracterized as normative descriptive, while in fact there's a lot of understanding involved. Comparing institutions across countries, interpreting why they are where they are, it's actually quite, it's not just description, it's really a deep understanding. And in this respect, one of his favorite scholars in this area was the German and American constitutional scholar and political scientist Karl Joachim Friedrich, the author of the classic Man and His Government, but also Constitutional Government and Democracy. And that book really was to his heart, and he used it for many, many, many years also later at University College in Utrecht to teach about comparative political institutions. So I would say that in his Constance year, we really also contributed further to his curiosity-driven approach, which Brigitte also mentioned, making sense of peculiar things by carefully comparing, and also, as Brigitte said, typologies and so on. And perhaps again, on a personal note, for me, this attention to context, the importance of comparison for understanding, has also shaped my identity as a scholar. So when I feel I go too much down the road of just, let's say, theory testing and method applications, I step back and try to think. So wait, what is the puzzle? What is the puzzle here? What is the peculiar here? So I step back and think about the questions which Frans would ask. So obviously for me, Frans was a very important person, so well professionally, but also in my private life. And yeah, I'm happy to be part of this.
Thank you very much, Marcus. It's very touching. I remember meeting you as a PhD student in Utrecht, and it created another friendship that kept us together until today. So this is again Frans. I'll invite Charles Rabb to speak and to speak to get us into his kind of where did he meet Frans, and then we'll go with Wichel, and then we go another colleague, and then another students, and so on. So first Charles, and then Wichel, please.
Well, thank you very much, David, for giving us all the opportunity to take part in this sad but wonderful event. I think that probably among all the people who are present, I possibly knew Frans the least well, although now thinking back, I can't really remember when I first met him or under what the circumstances were. My field of research in public policy has been variously in the earlier years with regard to education policy, and then more recently, and for many decades now, information policy, privacy, data protection, and things like that. And I had a hand in looking at policy networks and policy communities, and maybe it was through that I had some earlier contact with Frans. I always appreciated his, what shall I say, his diversity, his ability to look freshly with new perspectives at many things which I was always interested in. But the most vivid memory that I have of him in action was in 2007 at the ECPR joint sessions of workshops, which was held in Helsinki during May of 2007. Incidentally, it coincided with the Eurovision Song Contest being in Helsinki, and maybe, for all I know, Frans was spending his time not with us in the workshops, but in looking at the Eurovision Song Contest. But be that as it may, he gave a very stimulating paper in a workshop that was organized by Andreas Busch, who is now at the University of Göttingen in Germany, and we organized a workshop on privacy and information modes of regulation. And there were quite a number of people there. I don't know whether David has the slides that I sent him from that session. But in any case, Frans came and he gave a paper called Information, Risk, Power, and Work, a Political Sociology of the Information and Control Industry. And this was really a very offbeat approach in the context of that workshop, where most of the people were concerned with privacy, data protection, and things like that. And here Frans was coming to talk about the sort of rise of the information society and the control society, and how the control society is based upon the gathering and the use of information under the rubric of surveillance, which was and still is a very important concept. And his paper was very refreshing because he went into things very, very critically and with new insights that caused me to think, and probably caused many other people in the workshop to think freshly about what we were doing and how we might want to look at it through the lenses of a political economy of what he called the control industry, that where you have the piling on of controls and the piling on of surveillance and the gathering of information, which impinges, of course, on privacy, data protection, and so on, but also has a lot more dimensions to it concerning the way bureaucracies work, the way regulation works, the way risk works. And I think this is a very good addition to that workshop. I don't know that he has ever published this paper. Certainly, I can't find it in English. Maybe he's used parts of it in Dutch publications. I have a copy of it if anybody wants to see it. And I'd love to know whether he really did ever publish it anywhere else. We had plans to turn that workshop into a book, but that never materialized. Anyway, Frans was always a delightful person to meet. I wish I had known him better socially. Certainly academically, I was not only aware of him, but had met him, as I mentioned, on several occasions. And his contributions were quite formidable. And now that he is sadly gone from our presence, I think I will probably want to look back at a number of his writings, which I didn't quite appreciate at the time that he wrote them, on governance and on risk, and begin to look at things again through the perspectives which Frans was giving them in his work and in his contribution to that particular workshop. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join me. Oh, there's photographs. That was in Helsinki. There's Frans with his head resting on his arms. And there's another one where he is standing up. Okay.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
And I'd like to invite Wigel to join us now, and perhaps later on Amy. Amy? Yes.
Okay.
So Wigel, you start now.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And maybe the internet connection is not that good here from Aruba, where I'm at the moment now. But thank you very much for organizing this and for the opportunity. I would like to focus on three, you could say, dimensions of my cooperation with Frans that started already 30 years ago when he came to Utrecht. I was at that time an assistant professor on a temporary basis, working my butt off, to be honest, on one of the largest programs on policy sciences within the Faculty of Social Sciences. And we desperately needed a professor, a full professor, that could inspire the group that there was struggling at that moment. And I remember that when he came, that really changed the atmosphere. And it was, to be honest, it was a two-sided experience. The first one with that through Frans, I met already quite soon quite a number of very inspiring and lovely people that I still are in touch with now, and several of them are in this meeting, like Brigitte, like Marcus, but also Sebastian Prinsen, and you yourself, David. I met at the Center of Policy Studies at that time. And also he was inspiring in bringing in a lot of knowledge and a broader perspective. It really was broadening my perspective on policy studies at that time, which was great. And I profited from it since then. The other side was that, as Brigitte already mentioned, he was a very bad organizer. And I had to find a way that we were able to cooperate together. And I remember one time in that period that I said to him, I'd love to cooperate with you, but not with you as my boss. And that was more or less, I think, that also made the success of our cooperation. After that, he stopped being my boss later on. But in that period, I really learned a lot. We teach together at the University College in Utrecht, and we work together on policy implementation. So it really was pleasant. The second thing is that after we changed our positions and we were not working together anymore on a daily basis, we kept on meeting each other. And we kept on meeting each other in different programs. And the last one you were involved in yourself, also David, was the program on European citizenship. And also there, he was the one that was able to more or less formed himself the umbrella through which those 22 participants from 18 countries had to work together. And he was the intellectual godfather of that project. And again, there I learned a lot from him. But I must say that the most precious memories for me with him were with Brigitte together in the course that I developed with some friends after the wars in former Yugoslavia in the Inter-University Center in Dubrovnik, where we organized a course on process of inclusion and exclusion in Europe, later branded as the Challenges of Europe course. And every 2 years he came there to work with a very interdisciplinary and very international group of students and colleagues. And that was where he was, as we say in Dutch, he was the fish in the water. He was really in the environment that he was able to be as inspiring as possible. And even in the last edition that we had pre-COVID in 2018, he was able to comment on presentations of students and to participate in that. And that's how I want to remember him, for me, as this inspiring mentor and intellectual friend that always came up with another angle and perspective to look at the issues that were there, that we discussed and that are relevant for us. So thank you very much for the opportunity, David, to share this with you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And it's great that we met via Frans, and hope to keep in touch later on. Professor Amy Verdun, please. University of Columbia, I think, right?
Yeah, University of Victoria and Leiden University. Yeah, I'm very honored to be part of this memorial. I think what often is a challenge for those of us who are like Frans van Waarden, who was a globetrotter who had very vast networks of people all over the globe, is that it's very difficult for communities who know each other to meet. And it's a bit sad, but also happy that we now end up meeting with our connection through him, whereas we would as a group maybe not have ever met collectively in exactly this setting. Because he was the kind of person who would know lots of people through lots of different angles. And whenever he would be in that space, he would be in that space and just being there and joining with the people and taking the time to also be a social person, to connect and to take the moment. So these days, a lot of the up and coming scholars are very much worried about their impact factor. What's in it for me? Will I get something out of this? Is this a useful publication? Am I working with the right person? All of those things. I was thinking when I didn't know Frans van Waarden very well, because our paths went through different routes. Like he was at NIAS, I was at NIAS, but not exactly at the same time. I met him a few times at the EUI, but I was there at different times and he was there, but you know, we occasionally came across one another. Obviously he was strong in the Dutch political science community, and he did a lot of work on the European Union. One of my PhD supervisors or PhD assessors was Philippe Schmitter. So our paths have crossed in so many ways. But as I said, we're so much a global community. I think what I really appreciated about what he has done in terms of his contribution to the academy and to our social community has been exactly that sort of mix of intellectual curiosity and a commitment to advancing knowledge from his own inner spirit, and really taking his own sort of, I would almost say like his own divine spark, without being super religious, but his own sort of that what is in his core. He would use that to move his research agenda along, and not too worried about what other people would think about him or whether it fits in something in particular. He would just be kind of trying to ground himself. I like what Marcus was saying about is it you want to do, right? He would take that as a spark that would move him forward. And on the other hand, he was the kind of person, as David Lavie-Fouwer started off talking about, who would bring people together. He was very generous. He would take time. He would make sure that the next, the colleague, the next generation, the community would be served. And his work on the University College and in the ECPR and so on, those are all very altruistic exercises where you're not only thinking about what's in it for me, but you're continuously also thinking about what comes after. And I think in that kind of spirit, the kind of values that he portrayed are those that I think we should very much hang on to, especially as the world becomes more efficient and effective, and we have to measure impact and think about how we as a community serve the world, we may be overshooting in how we measure people's successful careers, people's contribution in those very narrow senses. And I think people like Frans van Waarden are a good reminder to us that being a good scholar, being a good community leader, being a valuable contribution to a social and academic community takes way more than these very superficial but important, obviously, indicators. And that I think I would like us to remind ourselves about these values that he was portraying, his camaraderie, his friendship, his willingness to share with others. That was one of the reasons why I thought I really wanted to be part of this today. So thank you, David, for giving me a chance to share my views on why I think he made such an important contribution to our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Very moving and very thoughtful words that I will take with me. Thank you. Esther, please.
Yes, thank you very much, David.
Yeah, and then we'll go for Teti and then Sebastian, if okay.
Perfect. Oh, Amy, thanks so much for sharing this. I couldn't agree more. I'm one of Frans's PhD students, starting a little bit after Marcus and Sebastian. My start was a bit rough, to be honest, because Frans was not there for the first 3 months, because sadly, in that period, his mother passed away. So he was in Canada, I believe it was, that he was taking care of everything. But luckily, Marcus and Sebastian were there to pick me up and to help me get started. So thanks to you guys also again for that. And then, to be honest, Frans was the type of PhD supervisor that in the beginning I was so much struggling with, in the sense that he, it has been mentioned already before, he's quite chaotic. He was not always prepared. He would not always have read my pieces. And there I was, a very nervous starting PhD student, thinking, I just want him to tell me what to do. But what would Frans do? He would indeed have these yeah, we would not discuss the text that I would have submitted. We would have almost philosophical discussions about where this project was going, what I was doing. And in retrospect, I learned so much from him. And to be very honest, if I now look at being a professor myself, having my own PhD students, I actually think I am more a Frans type of PhD supervisor than I ever would have imagined myself to be. So I really owe a lot to him, to indeed his intellectual curiosity and his way of looking at the big picture, looking at the important puzzles that really matter. But this is very much in line with what all the others have said already. I'm really grateful for having been trained into academia via him. So many thanks also again, David, for organizing this.
Thank you very much, Esther, and we'll talk later. But for now, let's move with the formal and talk. And Professor Teti Havinga, please.
I hope you can hear me now. I didn't really prepare a talk because, well, I said I could say something, but I didn't hear from you again. So, but I worked with him on several projects on the monitoring and enforcement of food regulation. And well, I really liked him as a co-author and working together with him, because he was a very inspiring person and he came always with new ideas of how we could analyze things or how we could organize things, and then not organizing in the material way, but more in the idea how you could organize your ideas. So he was very analytically, and I also, well, he also introduced me to the ECPI regulatory governance group. I think it was the second meeting of that group in Utrecht, and then he, well, he really urged me to go there and to present something, and well, I did, and I was really, I'm very glad that he did that, because I think it was the group, the academic group, that I felt best at home, and since then I ever go there all the times. So, well, I knew Frans before, but I only cooperated with him in the last years, last 10 years or something like that. And I really enjoyed that. This is.
Yeah, thank you, Tati. You became an important member of the Regulation and Governance Group, and I was not aware that this was via Frans, so I knew that you were, but we're working together, but I didn't know that, so I learned the new things. Thank you very much, Tati. And so we'll go to again to one of his PhD student, Dr. Professor Sebastian Princeton, and then to David Vogel.
Well, thank you, David. Yeah, indeed, I was a PhD student with Frans. I didn't know him before. There was an open vacancy, and I just sent a letter, and I was invited, and then they selected me, and that's how Frans and I got to know each other. And I recognize a lot of things that have already been said by other people, the things that also struck me, and things that were also important for me. I think also things that helped me a lot, because in academia we tend to make things small and manageable, and to think hard about methods and refine those methods over and over again. And this is exactly not what Frans was interested in. Frans was interested in the big picture. He was interested in the questions that lay behind our research. And that's what he also challenged me to do, to think bigger than I would do on my own, and also to start from creativity and curiosity. So ask the right questions and just wonder, look around, and there's so much in the world that you can wonder about. And that was really Frans. I mean, you could walk with him through a city and he would find research questions anywhere, and he would be able to link those things to other things that he knew or had just read or had researched himself. And I think that sort of capacity to be curious, and that capacity to link things that were seemingly disconnected, that was very special about Frans. And that was sometimes confusing, because it forced me to do things outside of my comfort zone and outside of the sort of the stable confines of traditional academic research. But I think that was also very important, because in the end, that's what we're here for. We're here to ask important questions and to give meaningful answers. And that was always the primary thing for Frans. On a personal note, just one small thing that I remember from my conversations with him, something that I found, well, also very charming, was that he's perhaps the only person that I know who was able to switch between 3 or 4 languages in one and the same sentence even. So he would start in Dutch and then throw in some English and German and maybe something else, and in the end it would be one sentence. And that was really Frans in a way. His cosmopolitanism, the fact that he had lived in so many places and that he felt at home in so many places. And also the fact that he could somehow link the experiences from those different places in just one single sentence, also using the languages that fit it. I think that was very much Frans, putting things together, making links, being part of what happened in all kinds of places around the world. And it was a privilege to be close to that, and to be part of his way of thinking. So that's something that I will always remember about Frans. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. And I saw, Charles, did you raise your hand, or it's just, did you want to say something, Charles?
No,
or
I'm afraid that was a mistake. I'm sorry.
No worries. So David Vogel, Professor David Vogel.
Let me apologize for my joining it late. I missed up the timing. I'm in Paris, and the original timing was California time, so I thought I'd got it right, but I got it wrong. I realize I've been an academic for almost 50 years, and through at least 3 or 4 of those decades, Frans has been an important part of my life. We began our interaction as colleagues with a common interest in regulation and governance. And as a result of that, he contributed a piece to a book I edited on What's the Beef, which dealt with food safety regulation. And when I think back of all the conferences we attended in Berkeley, in Berlin, in Paris, in Florence, in Dubrovnik, in Budapest, in Istanbul, we were part of a very broad community of scholars, and with a lot of professional interaction. But I think when I think back to Frans and my relationship, it began with our academic overlaps and interests, and that persisted. But I think the heart of my relationship with Frans was the time we spent vacationing together. And so for over a decade, every spring, Brigitte and Frans and myself and my wife would drive around some new place in Europe, which Frans would identify, and spend a week or two there visiting and touristing. We were in Austria, Estonia, Finland, France, Paris, the Netherlands, the Brittany, Belgium, Germany, and most recently Scotland. And what was striking was in each of those visits, Frans always insisted on driving, always knew where to go. And we would come across a random hill in some random European country. And Frans would say, you know what, if you walk up the top of that hill, you see a beautiful vista. And we would say, how did you know that, Frans? And Frans would say, well, several years ago, I was hitchhiking and I got up a hill and I took a picture. I was painting and I sort of had a memory of it. So his exhaustible knowledge of Europe and on those many trips the four of us spent together really were extraordinary. And not only to get a sense of Europe through Frans's eyes, but also, of course, all those trips having him draw upon his enormous knowledge of European culture, European history. So I know the EU has put a lot of effort into trying to create European scholars, people who are comfortable throughout the EU in different languages and different cultures and different traditions. And I can't think of anyone who more typifies a real genuine European scholar than Frans. He left us much too soon. He was an inspiring colleague, a very good and loyal friend, an extraordinary guide and traveling companion. And I will always treasure the many times the four of us sat around at a cafe or a bar or a restaurant in about 10 or 15 different countries in Europe. And we would have something to drink and we would all have some wine. But Frans, of course, regardless of where we were, regardless of what time it was, would always just have a beer. And my memory of those trips and of the conferences we attended and the work we shared are really enduring, and I miss him terribly.
Thank you, David. Thank you for joining us. It's very important, I know, for all of us, and for sure for Brigitte and Beto. And I'd like to invite Professor Wayne Grant to talk now. Wayne, please come in. Wayne, please.
Yeah, hello. I seem to have gotten into a muddle with Greenwich Mean Time, British Summertime, so it only does join because I have wonderful memories of Frans as a colleague through particularly the Organisation of Business Interest Project, where he made big contributions to what we did on food processing, which I edited, and then we had a daughter project which done that on organising business for war, which we produced a co-edited book. And I guess my memories of Frans, remember him as a particularly relaxed person, a very easy person to work with, which is not true for academics, someone who would make his arguments in a very persuasive way and would defend his position, but was always prepared to engage in dialogue and discussion. I learned a tremendous amount from during the period of time that we worked together. passing for me is a great loss. I'm very shocked to hear it. So I'm sorry I seem to have missed the earlier part of this, but hopefully it's been recorded, possible to look at it at some future date. So thank you.
Thank you, Juan. We'll have it on YouTube and on our channel. I'll send the link soon. But shall we? Anyone else want to talk? Jacinth, Beto, Nora, Ingrid, anyone? If not, I will just say that how I met Frans, and this is towards the end of my PhD, when my PhD supervisor, mentor, Professor Yaeli Shai, came back from the ECPR joint session meeting, and she pushed me and say, read this. And this read this was really eventually two papers of his that were published in the European Journal of Political Research in 1992. This is the famous paper on policy networks, on typologies of policy networks, with many networks and many types of networks, combining corporatism, pluralism, ethicist, and other forms of policy networks, clarifying the field, looking at different dimensions of networks. And this paper was then probably, it was one paper, then was probably applied to a comparative paper of comparing the Netherlands and the United States. France was a star in this joint session workshop, and my supervisor Yaeli Shai told me read it. At the same time, she told me she mentioned David Vogel and guided me in this direction. And when I finished my PhD and was looking for postdoc and opportunities for research, I immediately contacted Frans and then David Vogel. I was 2 years in Berkeley for postdoc, met David, and before I was meeting Frans, and we applied to a grant and was successful, and it was very, very encouraging, generous with his time, with his kind of mentorship. I remember spending at least 2 summers in his home in Utrecht when he traveled. And I don't know if you remember, David, the first contact with Frans and Brigitta, when I was in Berkeley as a postdoc, I think, and they were revisiting Stanford, and then you two met, and of course Brigitta and Virginia, and you stuck together. So Frans was very generous, very intellectual, a scholar to follow, to learn with. Always interesting to talk with him. Always funny, open, relaxed, a character, someone that I will miss a lot. And for me, it's doing this memorial is a way to remember and to give back. Years later, I think 20 years later, after my postdoc, I met his son, Beto van Waarden, who was, I always heard about Beto, but Beto later on appeared in my life when I organized the this is Beto, when I organized the graduate conference for students in political science, public policy, and international relation in Jerusalem. And Beto came to the conference, and of course he won one of the prizes, one of the best paper prizes. And it was, so I was privileged also to know him. And now Beto, to those of you who do not know, finishes PhD, and I think he has a position, but I'm not completely sure about which type of position, but I do know that Frans was very, very proud of him, and was always speaking about Beto. So thank you, thank Frans to get to know Beto, and I also want to say that via Frans I met Brigitta, who became also a friend. Where are you, Brigitta? So Frans really left me not only with intellectual direction, mentorship, but also real friends and a very close one. And his memory and friendship will stay with me. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone wants to talk still?
Yes, thank you, David, for organizing all this. I think Frans would have really loved this. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. We really going to miss.
And thank you also all for, yeah, it's quite nice to hear a little bit about sort of the other side of his life that I didn't usually see so much, because he was out around the world roaming around, as you mentioned, being lost usually. I mean, eventually he got a cell phone, but it didn't really matter because it was never on, or he didn't seem to know how to work with it. But he always seemed to turn out somewhere to be in Poland writing a book or something. So it was always a bit of a funny family dynamic there. But it's very nice to hear about sort of his scholarly life, which in a funny way I experienced a little bit even when I was in school, when, you know, every now and then I would try to ask him if he could quiz me for a test in, you know, in grade 5 or something. And then rather than asking me, simply sort of turning the sentences in the children's book, the school book, into a question, he would go off on these huge tangents into completely different areas, which were all very interesting, but had completely nothing to do with, you know, what would be on my grade 5 test. So, I mean, I learned a lot. It didn't prepare me for my school tests, but I guess I passed primary school in the end anyway. But, and yeah, I mean, in the end, we had the idea of, oh yeah, we wanted to sorry. Yeah, I mean, we always had the idea that one day we would write a book together, which, I mean, he had enough, in a way, unfinished projects still lying around that we could, in a way, kind of just simply use that. We didn't even need to do the research because he had already interviewed 1,000 people at the police department and at the justice department and basically everyone else in society anyway. But yeah, we never got around to it. But then, yeah, and in the end, which I guess I mentioned at the funeral, so some people maybe have seen it, but I did ask him for yeah, sort of 10 sociological insights, 10 life insights, and 10 sort of interesting family stories. And he thought about it a lot, and he actually put quite a lot of bit of thought into it, but he didn't, yeah, manage anymore with the disease. But funnily enough, the thing he always said was, or the one thing that always came back to was, yeah, in Dutch it's haastige spoed is zelden goed, which basically means, you know, rushing things is never a good thing. And obviously he characterized that because he was, as people have mentioned, he was very unorganized and he was always late, and always sort of blaming his youth in the tropics for that. But I think it also characterized the way he thought and worked, right? That he took his time, but he thought things through, and then and seemed to come up with a lot of interesting things. And it was quite nice to hear from you a bit more about what some of these interesting insights actually were. So thank you for sharing that today.
Thank you, Beto. It's difficult not to see much of Frans in you, and not only in the physical, but also the choosing history as a discipline. And I hope to keep in touch. So let me say thank you all. And thank you for joining us.
I just want to say hello to Brigitte.
Hello, David. I just phoned Virginia so that you join. I guess you got the message.
Right. I was got the timing off. Yes.
And David.
Thank you very much, all.
Thank you, David.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much,
Bye.
David. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.